looked like nothing more than an ordinary wedding photograph from the 1920s. But when you looked closely at the groom's right hand, a hidden secret appeared. The Maxwell estate sale in downtown Chicago was slowly ending on a cold, rainy October afternoon in 2024. Most of the valuable items had already been taken: beautiful antique furniture, sparkling jewelry, and fine old paintings. Only dusty boxes, half-empty shelves, and forgotten scraps remained. David Chen, a quiet archivist at the Chicago History Museum, arrived late in the day between meetings. He did not expect to find anything important, but he had learned over the years that estate sales could sometimes hide surprising pieces of history. He walked slowly through the cluttered rooms, his eyes scanning every corner with care. Most things left behind were useless, now broken gadgets, old threadbare clothes, and paperback books with torn pages. But in a dark, dusty corner of the attic, hidden under a pile of yellowed newspapers from the 1950s, David discovered a worn leather photo album. The cover was cracked and faded, and the binding felt loose, but he opened it gently. Inside were dozens of old snapshots from the 1920s and 1930s. Their sepia colors had held up surprisingly well after so many years. David paid $15 for the album and carried it carefully back to his office at the museum. That evening, the building was quiet. Most of his co-workers had already gone home. David sat alone at his desk under a bright lamp and began to look through the album page by page, making small notes as he went. The pictures showed warm family gatherings around dinner tables, children playing happily in sunny yards, men in stylish fedoras standing proudly beside early Model T Ford cars, and young women in flapper dresses striking poses on wooden porches. Each photo felt like a small, quiet window into lives that had been almost completely forgotten. Then, near the center of the album, David turned to a page with a much larger photograph. It was clearly the most important picture in that section. A young couple stood on the wide stone steps of a church, surrounded by family members and guests dressed in their best clothes. The bride wore a lovely white dress trimmed with delicate lace. A long veil flowed down her back, and she held a bouquet of flowers tightly in her hands. Her face looked calm and almost blank, the stiff kind of expression common in old photographs, before people started smiling naturally for the camera. The groom stood straight beside her in a dark suit, white shirt, and tie. His hair was neatly combed, and his face appeared serious and tense. Behind them rose the tall stone front of the church. At the bottom of the photo, written in faded ink, were the words, "Vincent and Catherine, June 12, 1926, St. Michael's Church, Chicago." David studied the image for a moment. Everything seemed normal at first, just another young couple beginning their life together in the busy, troubled 1920s. But something about the groom's posture felt wrong. Vincent stood too rigidly, with tight shoulders and a set jaw that showed discomfort instead of joy. His left arm was linked with Catherine's as expected, but his right arm hung down at his side in a strangely careful position. Curious now, David leaned in closer under the bright light. He took out his phone, took a clear, high-resolution picture of the wedding photo, and uploaded it to his computer. When he zoomed in tightly on the groom's right hand, his breath stopped for a second. The fingers were not relaxed or natural. They were shaped with purpose, forming clear letters in sign language. They spelled out HELP. David sat completely still at his desk, staring at the screen. The message was unmistakable. On his own wedding day, the groom had used his hand to silently beg for help. He immediately picked up his phone and called Dr. Rebecca Hale, a colleague who specialized in the history of sign language and accessibility in early America. Rebecca arrived at the museum about 20 minutes later, her coat still wet from the light rain outside. She was in her late 40s, with sharp, observant eyes and graying hair pulled back neatly. David showed her both the original photo in the album and the enlarged image on his computer screen. Rebecca studied it in silence for several long minutes, zooming in and out, turning the picture from different angles. At last, she sat back, removed her glasses, and said quietly, "This was done on purpose. The hand position is too exact to be random. He is spelling the word help in American Sign Language as clearly as he could, while trying not to draw attention. He was asking for help at his own wedding." The next morning, David came to work early and began serious research. He now had two important clues: the names Vincent and Catherine, and the exact date and place of the wedding. He started with old newspaper archives at the Chicago Public Library, and after searching through society pages from June 1926, he found the marriage announcement in the Chicago Tribune. It read, "Miss Catherine Marie Rossi, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Antonio Rossi of the near West Side, was married to Mr. Vincent James Mell of Little Italy on June 12th at St. Michael's Church. The ceremony was small, attended only by family and close friends. The couple would make their home in Chicago. Both last names were common Italian ones in Chicago's busy immigrant neighborhoods. The near West Side and Little Italy were areas heavily involved in bootlegging and organized crime during Prohibition. David soon discovered that Antonio Rossi had run a secret bar and had close ties to the feared Jenner brothers, who controlled much of the illegal alcohol trade in those parts of the city. Vincent's background was very different. Born in Chicago in 1902 to hardworking Sicilian immigrant parents, he had grown up in Little Italy. His father worked as a tailor, and his mother took in sewing and laundry to help the family. Vincent was a bright student who did well in math and graduated from high school in 1920. He studied accounting for 2 years and found a steady job with a wholesale grocery company. Everything about his early life suggested he was on a safe, honest path. Then, early in 1926, he suddenly quit his job with no explanation. A few months later, he appeared in the wedding photo. David met with Dr. Thomas Brennan, a respected professor at Northwestern University who had written many books about Italian immigrants and organized crime in the 1920s Chicago. Thomas examined all the materials David brought: the wedding photo, the newspaper notice, and old city directory listings. When he saw the sign language message in Vincent's hand, his eyes grew serious. "This is very rare," he said. "Most men in Vincent's position disappeared without any trace. But he found a clever way to leave a message behind. It looks like he was forced into this marriage." Thomas explained that accountants were very useful to gangsters because they could hide large amounts of illegal money. Vincent probably knew dangerous secrets about the Rossi family's business. To keep him quiet, they forced him to marry Catherine. In that culture, marriage created strong family ties that were hard to break and gave them extra control. Looking deeper at the wedding photograph with Rebecca, they noticed even more troubling details. The guests looked stern and watchful instead of happy. One older, heavy man, likely Antonio Rossi, stood with his arms crossed, staring hard at the camera like a guard. The women's faces looked anxious. There were no warm smiles or joyful expressions anywhere. The whole scene felt cold, like a business deal rather than a celebration of love. David also found a short police note from June 13, 1926, the day after the wedding. It mentioned a disturbance at an apartment on West Taylor Street where Vincent lived. Officers arrived, but no arrests were made, and the person who called decided not to press charges. When David checked the 1930 census, Catherine was listed as a 26-year-old widow living with her parents. Vincent was nowhere to be found. A death certificate dated February 1927 said Vincent James Mell, age 24, had died from an accidental drowning in the Chicago River. The body was identified only by personal items. The coroner who signed it was known for covering up suspicious deaths connected to organized crime. Later, David visited the Archdiocesan archives and found a sealed envelope containing Catherine's personal belongings from 1952. Inside were a rosary, a small prayer book, and 3 private letters she had written to Vincent but never sent. The letters were heartbreaking. In the first one, dated December 1926, Catherine wrote that she was sorry and that she had not known her father's plan at first. She had thought Vincent wanted to marry her. By the time she learned the truth, it was too late. In the second letter, she described how her father had brought Vincent into their home as an accountant and then pressured him into marriage by threatening his parents and sisters. Vincent had been kind to her, but later confessed he did not want the marriage and planned to go to the authorities with what he knew. The third letter, written in February 1927 with smudged ink from tears, said simply, "They killed him." Catherine blamed herself for not warning Vincent or helping him escape. She lived the rest of her life in silence and guilt, staying with her parents, never remarrying, and rarely leaving the house except for church. She died peacefully at home in 1952 at age 48. David felt the story was too important to keep hidden. He organized a special public talk at the Chicago History Museum. The room was packed with historians, journalists, and many people from Chicago's Italian-American community. He stood at the front with the wedding photograph enlarged on a large screen behind him, Vincent's, and clearly spelling help for everyone to see. David told the full story slowly and clearly: how he found the album, how he discovered the secret message, the forced marriage, Vincent's brave but failed attempt to escape, his murder, and Catherine's lifetime of quiet regret. When he finished, an elderly woman in the front row raised her hand. Her name was Maria Santoro. With emotion in her voice, she said, "Vincent Mell was my uncle, my mother's brother. No one in our family ever talked about him. They only said he died in an accident, and we should never ask questions. Thank you for bringing his voice back to us after all these years." In the following weeks, more relatives contacted David. They shared old family photos, letters, and stories that helped paint a fuller picture of Vincent's short, honest life. They also confirmed that the family had lived in fear after his death and had been warned not to speak about it. The museum created a permanent exhibit featuring the wedding and photograph, copies of Catherine's letters, Vincent's death certificate, and clear explanations of how organized crime had quietly destroyed so many innocent lives during the Prohibition era. The display also explained how Vincent used sign language as a quiet form of resistance when he could not speak freely. Today, visitors to the museum stop and read the story. They look at the young groom's hand in the old photo and feel the weight of what happened. A simple cry for help, hidden in plain sight for nearly a century, had finally been answered. Vincent's silent message had crossed time, and now, at last, the world could hear him.